I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the availability of photography that has been held in private collections or in public collections to the public now. What is the division now between what is unavailable and what has been digitalized or is available to see in person of those sorts of collections?
Well, in Bergen, like I said, we have 1.2 million photographs, and about 75,000 have been digitized and made available online. And that doesn't seem like a large percentage, but we know that's, it's gonna be more, but maybe it's not gonna be more than 200,000, 300,000. Some of the collections that we have with digital, not just digitization, but also storage, it costs money. We've got one collection which is a geologist who traveled around Norway photographing rocks. And it's questionable how interesting it is for, a larger audience with thousands of pictures of rocks. For researchers, it's very interesting, but some stuff you'll have to come to Bergen to see if you're interested. and I think I can't speak for every collection, but I think a lot of collections have those same issues. It's balancing cost and interest and what is actually possible. Not the digitization bit of making something available is quite quick, but registering all the metadata that you need to actually be able to find and learn from those images, that takes a long time.
I guess I'll just add that Ron knows this, the very, very first thing we did was digitize, because you can't make a book, you can't make an exhibition catalog, you can't share with curators unless those photos are digital.
Thank you very much for both of the presentations and for your work on this show. It's just really so wonderful to have it here. Obviously, there are wonderful points of comparison and contrast from an aesthetic point of view, from a cultural point of view, political point of view, all of these different aspects. But I wondered if both of you could maybe share your biggest kind of surprise aha moment, one of the moments when you were looking at photographs or thinking about particular settings or artists where all of a sudden there just something clicked and you thought, wow, there is something profound here. But maybe just if both of you could share maybe one of those experiences of something just that really just shone out to you as, wow, this is compelling.
My biggest thing, Marthe touched upon this in her talk, was the World's Fairs and going through the catalog of the Centennial exhibition in Philadelphia in 1876 and seeing Knudsen's name in the same catalog as the American photographers. And to me, when I'm in the galleries here, I think, wow, this is the first time possibly since 1876 or 1893 with the World's Columbian Exposition that we're doing this, that they would have seen them, visitors would have seen them together in the 19th century, that they could have had their stereo card, of the American West right next to their stereo card of Norway, again, because they are so accessible. And to me, this is that kind of almost recreation of that moment in the 19th century, that this is not a new thing, but it's exciting.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. Yesterday, no, it was 2 days ago. 2 days ago, when we were sat out here in the museum lobby, and we were looking towards the big vista, the big panoramic window, and we were looking out towards the mountains here in Provo, and thinking, this could be a Norwegian mountain. And it just made so much sense that we were here and that these images are also here.
Marthe, I'm really intrigued by, well, actually both of you touched on this, but some of the gendered aspects of the photography and of the collecting. And I'm curious, especially from the collecting standpoint, what is there anything particularly that accounts for this, that it seemed to be women that took the initiative in building some of these archives, or seeing the value in some of these archives initially, and how did that maybe change practice? Or, I mean, it's not changing the practice, but establish the practice in a certain kind of way. I don't know, that's a fairly speculative question, I guess.
Yeah, but I'm very glad you're asking that question, because working in the picture collection, I always knew that we had, our grand ladies there, and they are legends. We don't say Miss and Mrs. in Norway, but these two they're Miss and Mrs. And working on this presentation, I was surprised to see all these other female names popping up in the sources when I was trying to get a firmer grasp of the history of the collection, and also the City of Museum of Bergen collection. And so I was very surprised to see all these women, and I think that's something I'm going to be looking into in more detail in the future. But I think one of the reasons that it's women is that especially Miss Ragna Solid had a huge interest in genealogy, which I know is not something that just women do, but it is something that a lot of women do. So her interest was not actually with the photograph as objects. She was purely interested in who's on this picture. So I think that accounts for some of it, but certainly not all of it. And it certainly doesn't account for the fact that the picture collection has had purely female leaders in its history, for example. So it's now the fourth head of the collection, and we've all been women. So I don't know, and I don't know what it means, but I'm going to be looking more into it. Yeah. And I think there's also a lot of nurturing going on. There's a desire to take care of and preserve and share.
So obviously you're very familiar with the collections, the photographers, the history behind the collections and photographers. It's just so personal to you at this point after so many years. Me and my coworkers work, in the exhibition, taking, tours of young students through middle schoolers, high schoolers, and even young adults like ourselves. Is there anything that you feel, being so familiar with the collection, that you'd like them to take away? Is there any one lesson that you'd like them to learn?
One lesson.
That's a great question. So I'm going to go to my default too, as also doing kind of museum and gallery education in my own job. And I just encourage people to look closely, to slow down and find those details, find that point of connection, trust yourself, trust your instincts, trust your own sense of connectedness. And maybe the departure point for your visitors, because we're here in Utah, is the location. In Pennsylvania, I did have a student from Utah who was working in the gallery and felt like she was at home the whole semester, which is wonderful. So you can start with that place of home, but I always say, just slow down. We're very used to looking super quickly at all of our images all day long, scrolling. But there is a reward in slowing down, and then again making those comparisons and learning to look a little bit differently. And the team here has done a wonderful job of finding even new comparisons and similarities that I don't think we had considered.
And I want to give a little shout out to the photographer at the picture collection in Bergen as well, because he does that. He looks very closely, and he was a great help for us when we were looking through the Knudsen images in particular, because there's so many of them, and he's been working with them for 20 years. And he's digitized them. He sees them on a pretty large screen, so he's already much more familiar with them than what we were as curators. So he does that. He looks, and that's super important. Yeah. But I also think what Shannon was touching on in her talk, that the gendered aspect, I think is really important to note, that even if the photographers here are male, there were female photographers as well, and we see females in the images as well in quite surprising ways, which I think that's quite an important aspect. Mm-hmm.
Shannon, I was really interested in the way that you started out in terms of what is forgotten or left out or ignored in the photographs themselves. I think that was a really interesting idea to start with. I would tie that. I want to kind of go back to Marthe's presentation a little bit too, in terms of nation building, as this idea of putting forward what we think Norway is, for example, and maybe leaving other things behind. But more specifically, I wanted to know, Knut Knudsen, how explicit was he in his sense of nation building? Edvard Grieg, for example, was quite explicit that his music was tied to the nation building program. Henrik Ibsen, Bjørnstjerne Bjørnson. Just curious if Knut Knudsen had that same kind of idea of, this is what I'm doing as I photograph these marvelous landscapes. Was he explicit about this project of nation building, or is that something that kind of came along with maybe a public reception and?
Well, Knut Knudsen wasn't really, as far as we know today, explicit about anything, because we don't really have any written sources, so we don't know what he was thinking. But he did produce a series of images of people wearing different national costumes, for example, which was very of its time and very clearly related to the nation building project. And it's impossible, I think, to not read nation building into a lot of his images. At the same time, he's got such a huge production, so you can see a lot of different things in his images if you focus on other aspects of them. I wish we had more written sources. I wish we knew more about what he was thinking. But I think it's also important to always keep in mind that he was a commercial photographer. This was his livelihood. So he was thinking about, what does the audience want?
I'll just add very briefly, he was everywhere, from my understanding, like everywhere in Norway. And then secondly, I think he was aware that he was representing Norway in these World's Fairs, that there weren't many other Norwegian photographers representing Norway. So